My name is Doug Bandow. I'm a senior fellow at the Cato Institute in Washington, D.C., and I'm here for a conference put on by the Center for China and Globalization. Well, the world balance is diversifying, that we're seeing a weakening of what we used to call the West. We see the global South taking on a more important role, and we see the PRC kind of expanding its role. So the question for the future is how both the U.S. and PRC can work together. Because to have global governance work, it's very important to have the two countries with the largest economies and two countries with the greatest influence to be able to work together. Well, the most important thing for the China and the U.S. is to find a way to work together over East Asian issues to make sure that there's no possibility of conflict between the two. The worst war that one could imagine would be if one broke out between the United States and the People's Republic of China. So I think for these two countries, the starting point is finding a way to work through issues such as Taiwan and territorial issues in the region to ensure that they can avoid a conflict and make sure that there's no accident, there's no mistake, that nothing will bring them into conflict. Beyond that, they can cooperate in trying to solve other issues, but the starting point should be their relationship. Well, it's a perception of threat from one another. And the big issue for them, I think, is that the United States has treaty relationships with Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines. That brings the U.S. into the region very close to the PRC, while understandably China doesn't like to be hemmed in and is worried about having a major power with military forces nearby. So the challenge is how to work through that, where the U.S. can feel that it's honoring its treaty partners and at the same time not threatening China. Economics should bring the two countries together, but we're seeing on both sides more economic nationalism. We're seeing people talking about changing supply chains, and we're seeing, especially on the American side, pressure being placed on China in terms of technology. So that's an unfortunate area. In the past, economics has brought the two countries together. I think we need to find ways to still cooperate economically and recognize there's much that we can gain together. In terms of security, I think there are possibilities of bringing China in as a major partner in both the Middle East and in Europe, of trying to help bring peace. China deserves credit for having worked with both Iran and Saudi Arabia to bring them together. So the question for the United States is how to enlist China's support in the Middle East, for example, how to deal with Palestinians in Israel, how to try to improve relations with Iran. These are areas where I think there could be cooperation. And obviously, negotiations need to be held between Russia and Ukraine. That may be an area where China could play a very positive role, and if so, the U.S. should welcome that. Well, both sides should recognize that economic cooperation can benefit both of them. The problem here is this is a complicated relationship because it's Europe as well as the United States that's concerned. Well, I generally believe in free trade. So I'd like to see maximizing the opportunity of countries to deal with one another and people within to trade with one another. So I think that requires acknowledging that sometimes people are hurt by the expansion of trade, then how do you take care of them? And this is going to require cooperation among all of these countries. It should not be unilateral. I think unilateral tariffs are not helpful and they encourage retaliation. What needs to be done is to find a way to cooperate with each other and to address those problems, decide what are the most serious problems, and try to find solutions. Trade protectionism, I think, is a bad policy. They need to look beyond that, and it requires the PRC, Europe, and the United States as the major trading powers to work together. Well, obviously, the more that one uses coercive measures, the less cooperation there's going to be. I think what's important to recognize is that that kind of pressure rarely has a positive impact on the relationship. And almost always countries applying that kind of pressure are hurting their own citizens, as well as punishing another country. You're much more likely to get a win-win solution if you have a negotiation and a conversation, as opposed to simply impose something on the other. I think that there are strong pressures against globalization today. That globalization has had an enormously positive impact. China is an obvious example of millions and millions of people who've come out of poverty since the PRC joined the international economy. So I think globalization deserves a lot of credit for having empowered people, have made them more prosperous. But we see today, we see rising nationalism, we see concerns over economics, over security. We see major countries like the U.S. using economics as a tool, essentially a weapon in a political struggle. So all of these things are working against globalization today. I think it's important for supporters of globalization to work together, to recognize they need to defend what has been a positive process and address some of the challenges there. So we'll see where globalization goes. It's going to be a challenge.